to talk to Shivakumar, the chairman and CEO of PepsiCo in India. He was also the former CEO of Nokia in India. So man best positioned to talk to us about what Apple should or shouldn't be doing here. Shiv, appreciate you joining us here. You can see the frenzy and the excitement clearly about Tim Cook visiting India. But let's be clear, Apple needs India today. Apple's market share in India is below 2%. India is one of the fastest growing smartphone markets. It's soon to overtake the US, right behind it China. China is slowing down for Apple. It's seen its slowest sales growth since 2007. So while we get excited about Tim Cook being in India, Tim Cook needs India. Isn't that right?
I think your coverage is really good, Shireen. I was just watching the clips just now, and I think a lot of the people are really reacting to this trip in the right way. Going back to your question, India has about 200 million smartphones today, and is expected to have 398 million smartphones by the year 2020. So you're virtually going to double in the next 4 years. So that's a very large size market and one of the largest markets in the world. When you're looking at Apple, you're looking at volume share. Apple's a $2 billion company in India today. That's very big value. A smartphone today in India comes from a price range of 4,000 rupees to 70,000 rupees. That's a factor of about 1:16. That premium is something we've seen in almost every category, be it cars, be it cigarettes, etc. That's the price people pay for a premium brand and the aspiration and the joy of owning a premium brand. So I think Apple will have India absolutely bang in the center of its crosshairs, and India has to be a very important play for Apple in the future.
Oh, you're absolutely right. In fact, Tim Cook in his earnings call has said exactly that, saying that India could be the next China for Apple, and that how they've been increasingly putting their energy on India. But let's talk about the strategy going forward. And a lot of conversation is centered around price and whether Apple should actually come up with a low-cost model for emerging markets like India, or at least as far as cutting down prices for the Indian market is concerned. I mean, manufacturing is a long way off. We are not part of Apple's global supply chain at this point in time. The government would like Apple to make in India, but that's not about to happen anytime soon. So in terms of pricing, what would be imperative now for Apple?
So I think if you want to be a serious player in India, Apple should participate in the full value chain. And I think, as Ravi mentioned, whether it's the application ecosystem, whether it's in some part of manufacturing, or the kind of work they're going to do in the Maps Application Center in Hyderabad, I think that whole range Apple has to participate in. And I think Apple cutting price would actually hurt its own image, in my view, having worked in that sector for quite some time, for close to a decade. I believe Apple would need a very different strategy if it wants to go to the mass market of the Indian consumer base. I think that's a different strategy. I think cutting price on Apple would not be the best thing for a hugely aspirational brand like Apple.
You're absolutely right on that front, Shiv. But if I were to ask you about what we should expect or what we could expect in terms of strategy, because for the first time now, Apple is going to be setting up its own stores in India. They have asked the government for permission to enter India through the single brand route, and we've been told that the government has exempted them from the 30% domestic sourcing requirement to make it easier for Apple to actually open stores in India. So outside of setting up their own stores, what do you believe should be the strategy for Apple to get a larger market share here?
I would say, I think the retail investment is absolutely spot on, superb. That's one of the key pillars of Apple's success globally, and it has given rise to a huge fan following and also a huge amount of technical competence and expertise in the Apple chain. So that's absolutely spot on. I think Apple would have to do a lot of work with the app developers in India. I know a number of app developers who make a lot of their returns and money via Apple apps. And I think iOS, while it has only a 14% market share globally, I think it's one of the most profitable operating systems for developers. And I think I would expect Apple to play a much bigger part in the app eco-development system in India. I personally believe that given the nature of cell phone penetration in India, about 800 to 900 million phones right now, and 400 million smartphones in the next 4 years, I believe India will be the hub, if not the biggest hub, of app development in the future.
Oh, you're absolutely right on that front as well, Shiv. And as you pointed out, perhaps this move of setting up an accelerator in Bengaluru, which is really India's startup capital, is a strategic move on Apple's part, as you just pointed out.
Yes, and I think a lot of companies do this accelerator programs, etc. I think the key thing always is never to look at India as a wage arbitration center, but truly as a talent development center or a talent enhancement center. I think every experiment of most companies where they have used an R&D facility or any accelerator program as a wage arbitration system has not worked.
So Shiv, before I let you go, you know, the possibility of Apple actually manufacturing here in India. Foxconn has finally entered India. It's operating out of Sri City. Given your experience with Nokia, do you believe that Make in India for Apple is perhaps the next logical conclusion?
Yeah, I think we should try and invite as much of Apple's manufacturing as possible. We have a plant in Sri City, PepsiCo, and I went to visit that early this year. And I hopped across to Foxconn plant there. Josh Folger, who used to work in Nokia, is now the boss there. So I actually went around the plant and I saw the plants they have. Foxconn is an absolute top-notch company in terms of manufacturing mobile phones. And I think inviting Apple to India, I think for manufacturing, would be an excellent move for the Indian manufacturing sector. It's hugely value-adding, and more important, it generates a lot of jobs. For every million phones you sell, you're adding at least 1,000 or 1,500 jobs. So if you have the scale to sell 5-6 million phones, either India or outside, you can easily create 6,000-7,000 jobs. And I think that will be a fantastic story for the Make in India part.
Well, Shiv, it is always a pleasure speaking with you. Appreciate you joining us here exclusively on CNBC TV 18 as we talk about Apple in India and, of course, Tim Cook's plans for the country. Appreciate you joining us here on India Business Hour. Coming up